anyone who considers themselves a fan of the atmospheric horror genre has likely already played 2010's Amnesia: The Dark Descent. This year, we get our first sequel along with a surprisingly different expansion to the universe. The original Amnesia was developed and published by Frictional Games and was praised for its intense atmospheric presentation and dynamic scare tactics. The game literally played with the player's perceptions of reality. The next demented hallucination or desperate struggle to escape a horrific creature that may or not even be real was always just around the corner. This time, developed by the Chinese Room, those responsible for Dear Esther and the Penumbra series, and published by Frictional Games, Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs takes a similar approach but never quite takes full advantage of the core concept that was established by the original game. Can a game that sets out to be both familiar and different be successful in a genre with such a steadfast niche fanbase? I think that depends on how willing one is to go with the flow, so to speak. One thing is for certain though, Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs is an entirely different beast.
This dawning epoch, this age of reason, an empire grown fat, ripe for the bleeding.
As I mentioned before, Frictional Games handed off development of A Machine for Pigs to the Chinese Room, an independent developer that got their start developing mods for Half-Life 2 such as Corsikovia and more recently Dear Esther. Having just played through Dear Esther in the interest of research for this review, it's interesting to see how the studio has evolved. You might say that the Chinese Room specializes in developing an experimental, narrative-driven PC games, making them an inspired choice for developing a sequel to one of this generation's most notorious PC horror games. With that said, a slower-paced experience awaits those who are anticipating more of what The Dark Descent had to offer. Some of what the Chinese Room has learned from developing Dear Esther definitely carries over into the development of A Machine for Pigs. Set in the same universe as the original Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs tells a decidedly different story, set in London on New Year's Eve in the year 1899. Our protagonist and wealthy industrialist Oswald Mandus awakens after months of illness that kept him bedridden following a business trip in Mexico. After experiencing ominous fever dreams about a cryptic machine, Mandus awakens to find that his two children are missing and the foundation of his home is being shaken by earthquakes that seem to be emanating from an engine roaring to life deep underground. Of course, Mandus sets out to find his children and the source of these disturbances. Gameplay unfolds in similar fashion to The Dark Descent. The focus remains on first-person exploration, avoiding threats through hiding, and ironically, a dark descent into the depths of hell itself. Some notable design choices from the first game return, while others have been strangely omitted. For instance, the speed in which one opens doors is still contextual, while the inventory system has been completely removed. This leads me to the biggest change, and perhaps the biggest missed opportunity by the Chinese Room, which comes in the form of the lamp that you carry with you at all times. Unlike the original Amnesia, lamp oil is unlimited, and you are never left in darkness without the comfort of your light source. The lack of the inventory has also led to a bigger emphasis on environmental puzzles instead of those that require the player to find and store important items throughout the world. This ultimately made me feel like the world was a little bit less developed and simplistic, and ultimately dragged down the pacing. Like the original Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs sets a pretty unique tone throughout. It is a world that is bleak, depressing, and teetering somewhere on the edge of reality and science fiction. As you explore the drab and painfully normal-looking world, reality begins to blur into something that is unrecognizable. I found myself often questioning whether I just saw something out of the corner of my eye, or questioning whether the environment itself was changing behind me as I went deeper into the game. Like the original Amnesia, this sense of paranoia is created through gameplay and the disturbing world and events happening around you. It eventually culminates in the player questioning the sanity of the character they are controlling and brings the reliability of the narrator into question. As you travel deeper underground towards the machine, and solving the mystery of your missing children, the strange occurrences become more frequent. A mysterious voice calling himself the Engineer contacts you through random phones scattered throughout the world and helps you to propel you in the right direction and, of course, offer cryptic hints as to the fate of your children and the direction the story is heading. Here's where it gets a little weird. There are pig people. People that look like pigs, or people that have been turned into pigs, or hell, maybe pigs that are being turned into people. Who the fuck knows? I have no fucking idea. It is never made perfectly clear, but I'm sure this is some kind of commentary on the state of humanity. Regardless, it's effective and sometimes terrifying. Sometimes. Encounters with these creatures are used sparingly throughout, but I was constantly kept on edge thanks to some subtle but effective sound design. The game makes you feel like you are being pursued or stalked by these creatures throughout, even though the times in which you actually come face to face with one is pretty rare. It's a neat effect, but one that is easy to see through. Unfortunately, it's when you finally come face to face with one of these creatures that Atmosphere takes a bit of a nosedive. The pig people are frightening in concept. The pig people sound horrifying, and not knowing where they are around you can be a real cause for panic in this game. The moments when you get to observe them from a distance or learn about their origin are pretty creepy and effective. Unfortunately, when you actually see one face to face, they cease to be that frightening. This is one instance where I feel like it would have been more effective to never actually show you the monster, at least close up. Luckily, this happens so infrequently that it doesn't necessarily sour the experience too much. Speaking of infrequently, perhaps the strangest omission is that of the sanity effects that made the first game so memorable. While they are still present to a degree, their importance is played down so dramatically that they might as well not even be there. In the end, it makes the game feel far more linear than its predecessor, even when the design philosophy is largely unaltered. My biggest problem with this game, however, stems from the fact that so much of the narrative is driven by cryptic narration and notes littered throughout the world. It's possible to miss important notes that highlight or attempt to explain some of the most interesting and important plot points of the entire game. I'm not one to advocate complete transparency when it comes to horror. It's obvious that good horror is often based on what you don't see or understand, but one of the most interesting plot points in the game, involving the fate of his two sons, was something I didn't fully understand or realize until I actually read the wiki online. The game's gradual descent into science fiction was subtle and really well done, but the main revelations that would have provided some sort of closure to the story were left to chance, which bothered me when it was all said and done. The Chinese Room has done an admirable job of expanding the universe that started with the original Amnesia. However, a lot of cues are taken from their time developing the slower, narrative-driven Dear Esther. The atmosphere and narrative hits all the right notes, and it ultimately gives this game its own identity. With that said, this weighs heavily on the emotional impact of the gameplay and will likely leave fans who were hyped for the sequel somewhat disappointed. As a fan of the universe, I don't recommend anyone skip this title, but be prepared for a decidedly different kind of experience.